Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the West Point class of 1986 tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. My guest today is Paul Kelley, Cullum number 43333. We'll hear about Paul's adventures from the Rugby Pitch at West Point to the beaches of Wake Island. As always, the views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not of West Point, the Army, or any other government organization, most particularly the United States Army Civil Affairs and Psychological Operations Command. Now to the interview with Paul. Welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here, Paul, and thank you for inviting me. What an excellent venue.
Let's just dive right in. The Spoonie button, which is a small disposable button that is used on the bottom of the full dress gray. Are you for it? Are you against it? Is it a vestigial tale of an 18th century uniform, or is it the thing that knits the American military together in the current day?
You know, I'm glad you asked that question, Paul, because I was thinking about the Spoonie button recently and its implications, and clearly it's the latter in the example that you provided. Did you know the depleted uranium cladded Spoonie buttons are being used right now in eastern Ukraine?
I did not know that.
Yeah, in fact, they're being equipped on drones and they're destroying T-90 tanks, the ones that have the Home Depot sheds on top of them, and they're kind of going.
I believe they're called turtle tanks.
Indeed, turtle tanks, and they're being used very effectively there. So clearly, the Spoonie button is the point of departure for American power, both across the history of the Long Gray Line, but also moving forward. So,
well, I think we can just proof that this podcast is a breaking news podcast. The Spoonie button is the nemesis of the turtle tank. You heard it here first on this CNQ podcast. That's excellent. Where are you at now? What's your setup? Because I know you've got a good setup. Where are you at in the world now?
Well, I'm currently on the left coast of America, tucked up in the great Pacific Northwest, where I dwell on Mercer Island. I won't give you the specific address as this is a publicly disposed podcast. But here I am, and I've been out here off and on since we graduated, and I was first posted at nearby Fort Lewis, which is about 45 minutes south of where I am now.
And you grew up in Massachusetts. I know that because we were in a plebe company together.
Indeed, and you visited my hometown in wonderful Quincy, Massachusetts, as I often refer to it as the Irish Riviera. I did, and have never looked back since graduating from the military academy. Of course, I still have extended family back there on the Cape and in South Boston, but I myself have matriculated to the West Coast.
Right on. So you stay there by choice, or is it just kind of jobs and things keep you there, or is it you're there regardless? You like it that much?
Well, I like it that much. Both my first assignment in the military and my last sort of permanent duty station was out here. So I sort of retired in this general area, and then got a job working for Boeing, which is a big company out here, and then life sort of took me on. My kids are sort of native to the area, and now that they're adulting and in the area, I didn't see the need to move away from them.
So talk about them. So you have children in the area, which certainly will root someone in an area. Talk about what your kids and what are they up to?
Well, I have a son. He's 25. He is a human resources benefits specialist for a local Seattle company. And my daughter is 23, and she is the communications manager for a local nonprofit. Both recently graduates of University of Washington for my son and Washington State for my daughter. So they went to in-state schools, much to my wallet's delight.
It is a very amazing day when that last check is stroked to the college of their choice.
Exactly.
I remember my son's graduation fondly. So it's a wonderful feeling. So they
It
say the
is.
empty nest, but it's actually the empty wallet.
It is. And yeah, stores are being replenished now. I'm happy to report.
That's a wonderful thing. Let's talk about Quincy, Massachusetts, the young Paul Kelley. certainly a standout a member of the community in Quincy in the Irish River area. What was it about West Point and the military that attracted you, that attracted that young man?
Well, I'd always been interested in military history, and you know, growing up sort of on the knee of the so-called greatest generation and their um, exploits or non-exploits, as it happened to be in World War II. And as actually, as far as specifically West Point goes, it's an interesting story. So my mother, Barbara Kelley, was friends in the neighborhood about a block away with a woman named Barbara McConville, and they worked on various little community projects together and stuff like that. The McConvilles had a number of people in their family. I hung around with the ones who were age appropriate to me. A little bit older than me was a guy named Jimmy McConville, who went on West Point, I believe, 81, class of 81 or 82, and then went on to become the chief of staff of the Army, retired recently. And his mother put in my mother, when he got appointed to West Point, boy, it would be a great idea if
It filtered
PTE
into
was
the
all,
home.
yeah. I mean, well, it's in the hood, right?
Right. Right.
This non-stop pipeline of people out of Quincy, Massachusetts. I don't know if
We
I'm having
called
the
that the
last one.
golden pipeline
Yeah,
because I
the
mean,
Golden
chief of
Pipeline.
the
Yeah,
staff of the Army, yourself. I mean, it
yeah,
really
yeah,
was a
yeah.
source of rich talent.
I fell short of that lofty perch, but there can only be one, right? So hey, it wasn't me. But so that's how the idea of West Point was planted in my mind, and then of course went through the Byzantine process of being appointed, um, which of course eliminates probably most of the likely candidates, and then and applied out of high school, didn't get in, went to college for a year, and was granted admissions
So,
for
what
reason.
was your kind of talent that you showcased for West Point? Some of us were athletes, not myself. Some of us were academicians. Others did a lot of the leadership things. What was your resume
I,
packed
I
with
don't.
that got you
I
in?
don't think I had a particularly important topic, which may explain why I didn't get in the first time. Um, but I was a big hockey player in high school,
Okay.
and would have been competitive at West Point, but because I went to college for a year at another Division I school, when I was a plebe in Reorgy Week in good old C4 land with you,
Yep.
I got a letter from Carl Ulrich. You may recall he was the
I
director of
do
the
remember
Rugby.
Carl.
Fondly, I'm sure. And Carl informed me that due to my transfer from one NCAA school to another, that I was ineligible for intercollegiate athletics, which was interesting because I never played them at my college that I went to, and had only the most barest of inklings to walk on and try out for the hockey team. So and that sort of pretty much put the kibosh on intercollegiate athletics for plebe Paul Kelley at the time.
Right.
Uh,
However, you channeled all of that energy into another bloody sport because you're quite well known for your rugby exploits at the academy. Talk a little about how you got into rugby. Was it something you had your sights on, or somebody said, "Hey, you look like the kind of guy that could knock people over"?
an interesting journey. So I started playing club rugby when I was in my civilian college, and then took my skills to the Army Rugby Club at the time when I was a plebe, and they looked at me, and they, as is sort of a growing theme of the early part of this cast, they also decided that they didn't want anything to do with me. So it was left to my yearling year to retry out for the team, and probably due to various disciplinary infractions, they were short on people, and they agreed to place
Well,
me
that's
on
right.
one of
That's
the lower sides.
right.
Um, and so I played then my yearling year, my cow year, and my first year. I was again. It was a club back then. It's actually an intercollegiate sport right now, and quite successful.
Very much
Um,
so. It's very, very, very well known for its success. Now, take us back to Army Rugby as a club circa 1983 and 4. Like when you tried out, what was that like? Were they like beating you with folding chairs? I can't even imagine there was any process at all, or what was it like?
Well, it was a very interesting tryout. So the head of the rugby club was the British exchange officer, Major Joe Baker at the time, who was a New Zealander who was somehow seconded to the parachute regiment in the UK Armed Forces, and he organized his tryouts along some type of military assessment program. So we did log PT for a week down
Wow.
at close to where the field house is, down that funky field by where the
Right, right.
rifle ranges are by Shea Field. And we would carry them over our heads and then and do sort of log drills. And somehow this, I think, was just designed to weed out people who just didn't want to go to drill, figuring that log PT
Yeah,
was a
right.
lot harder than drill. And it did succeed. And we would actually place the logs on end, and then somebody would be nominated to climb to the top of the log. We actually dropped a log on somebody's shin, and it broke their shin during the tryouts. To which Major Baker responded, "Well, he should have gotten out of the way."
Right.
Um,
This would be the
and
rugby. This would be the rugby mentality, and for
yeah,
which you all were quite famous.
yeah, I don't think our defects safety culture that probably exists in the army now would have tolerated
I
that.
think that's fine.
So
I'm pretty
we went through
positive of
this
that.
process, and like I said, for some reason or other, I survived this gauntlet of logs and running and other things. All really, as Major Baker suspected, so I didn't have to go to drill. So
So for family members watching, drill was when we all had to go after school and basically march on the plane, and you couldn't find a more irritating form of non-exercise possible for an afternoon when you had a metric ton of homework that evening. So you had to
exactly.
go do drill, and they look great on the parades on Saturdays, but there was an enormous amount of suffering that goes into making those parades work. Anyway, it was a common getting out of jail card by being in a competitive club like the rugby club, because and there was a status. You had competitive clubs, and then you had what was considered hobby clubs. And if you
Yes.
competitive clubs where you got out of drill, a hobby clubs where you just went, and took pictures or did whatever, but you still had to go to drill. So that's what the getting out of drill was basically the entire thing of you get a telephone pole dropped on your shin to make sure that you are there just to get out of drill. And now he
Well,
can't drill
yeah,
because his shin is busted. So
that's true.
that's
So he did get out of drill too, though that
eventually he
person
got out of
was
drill.
at least for a while, and then
That's the
yeah.
West
So
Point way.
so we played rugby for the last 3 years when I was an upperclassman at West Point, and that was a great time. Obviously a very different atmosphere, both at West Point at the time and what may or may not pass as appropriate behavior now at the academy.
Now you had the unique opportunity to go study at another university and then come to West Point. How did you find the academics when you compared the two? Did it prepare you at all, having an extra year to prep up, or was it
It
just as
it
miserable as
did.
the rest of us were?
It did. I went to Clarkson University in upstate New York and took an engineering curriculum. So I had physics, chemistry, calculus, introduction to Fortran, a lot of the crap that we encountered early on at West Point. Without that, I may have been overrun by the academics at West Point, but I was
Right.
pretty well prepared since I was getting a lot of it the second time. I actually validated chemistry for some strange reason, so I never had to take it.
Look at
Uh,
that. I
yeah,
never knew
so
that. We're here to learn. We're here to learn these types of secrets. So we were together at a company called C4, the C4 Cowboys. We had an amazing group together, and that's how we know each other.
it's
And
true.
it was a sad day when we all had to part ways and go to different parts of the Corps. But we had quite a group there. Um, so, what was it like being a C4 Cowboy? Because we were known as being in a bit of a haze company.
It was a bit of a haze company, and of course we had our Go Cowboys, fired up C4 routine that had to be done at all times, to the aggravation of all of the companies around us or the people in the mess hall who happened to be sitting around us.
We did
Uh,
enjoy aggravating people, that's for sure.
we did. Yeah, I remember that there were several firsties who I would have qualified as people who took a forward position on the fourth class system, as it was known then. Uh,
That's a terrific way to frame it. You are
and
a smooth talker as well as a rugby standout. Took a
and
forward position on the fourth class system.
and I like to think that it added to my character moving forward. Um, and it really was actually pretty tolerable once things settled down a little bit, by October, November. But early on, it kind of sucked, and it was. But you really didn't know what other people were experiencing in their own companies. I suspect some of them were worse, and probably a lot of them were better. So it's, you just never really know what's going on when you're a plebe, other than what's right in front of you.
I connect companies like a McDonald's, right? You can go into a McDonald's and it's sparkling clean and it's wonderful, or you can go into one that's got roaches everywhere. It's just that local cadre that's making it happen. So if your
Exactly.
local company decides that you're going to be a difficult haze company, so it is.
It is, and there's nothing you can do about it because you can't change McDonald's at that point in time.
You can't change the basic system, that's for sure.
That's right. So it
So let's
was
switch
not.
into your column number, which is
Oh,
the column number is the number that we're all assigned when we graduate. So you get a column number, and that was invented back in the mid 1800s by a general, surprisingly named Cullum. So mine is 43,370. And I've been reliably informed that it was alphabetical. So your last name is Kelley, mine's LaFontaine, but you have probably the best column number in the class. I think you are a column number standout. 43,333. You could be like a taxi company with that column number. That's an amazing column number.
Uber does have a lot of career opportunities, and I haven't necessarily ruled that out here in my dotage. But
Well, it is all about maps, and we're pretty good with maps from the academy. So there's always a fallback to this kind of activity.
exactly, yeah, I'll have to delve into the numerology of 43333. I mean, if you add it up, you get 16. Um,
Well, I'm
and
glad you brought that up, Paul, because I, in fact, have looked up the Enneagram. There's an
wow,
Enneagram type 3, of
there
which
is.
you have 4 threes. So this means you take this reading and multiply it by 4. So threes are self assured, attractive and charming, ambitious, competent, and energetic. They can also be status conscious and highly driven for advancement. So you are that times 4 based on your column number. Congratulations.
Well, I appreciate that. I was wondering what was accounting for it. It obviously wasn't superior genetics.
This is where it comes from. Before then, you were just one of us. On the awarding of that column number, those were the traits that were handed to you on a silver platter. It's amazing. It's amazing what the Academy does for all of us.
It does, and I didn't really know they had turbocharged me like that on the way out the door. Do you get it when you graduate? There wasn't like a ceremony, like here's your column number. Like
Right.
there was ring weekend, and there wasn't like column number weekend, right? Maybe there should be.
Well, you know what? This podcast is here we're influencers, so who knows what might come out of these very informative conversations about such matters. But I'm now a little bit angry about my column number because I don't have anything nearly. They didn't confer anything to me. But anyway, mine looks like an address in a suburb. Anyway, on we go. So, what did you study at the academy? What was your what was your area of study?
Well, I was a math, science, and engineering concentrator.
Okay.
Which the only thing that got me is when I nearly flunked out of German as a plebe. The instructor decided to just give me a D because he asked me if I was, because I think HBA concentrators had to take another semester of foreign language, and since I told him I was MSE, which seemed like a good idea at the time, I didn't have to take another semester, so he passed me, which is a good thing because I think foreign language is one of the few things that they don't do STAP for. back in the day. Who knows what they do now? But so you were just ceremoniously booted if you flunked your foreign language, as I know. So I did not know that at the time. But I barely escaped death. You know,
And who was that instructor? Because I also was a German student, or student of the German language,
I
and
I don't I don't remember. I don't recall.
we had a character named Major Nienhagen, and he was
Ah,
this. He always wore these crisp um, khakis, and he had a writing
yes,
crop that he would smack on the desk, and it was like right out of Central Casting. You really can't make
yes,
it up. And I'm
yes.
positive that that character, like your rugby practices where they drop things on, they drop telephone poles on shins. I'm pretty sure Major Nienhagen would be frowned upon today.
Yeah, he was one of his colleagues,
One of the
but the German department kind of rotated around the
Yeah,
instructors,
yeah,
and I had the same instructor you're referring to, and he was wearing khakis. At least as plebes, they had I think the army wear out date in khakis was like the fall of our plebe year or something, or I don't know what it was, but
yeah,
it was
yeah.
soon in there. Yeah, yeah, he was all about, looking like he had, just come
Yeah,
out
if
of
anyone took a German
MACV
class, everyone knew
headquarters.
Major
Yeah.
Nienhagen because he was an astonishing guy. So, what was your most vivid memory as a cadet? Doesn't have to be, something nice and lovely. Like, what was the thing that stands out the most when you think back to those times?
As a cadet,
Mhm.
um, I mean, you know, it's interesting. I don't have a lot of stories about climbing over rock walls and getting chased by the military police.
We have
I
had some of those stories on the podcast.
We have, and entertaining than that they are. Um, And I don't know if the statute of limitations has run out on any of our sort of rugby hijinks or anything like that. Um, let me think. There was one time, when I was the vice president of the rugby club, which was basically responsible for logistics, and it was in the early fall of my of cow year. And I was flunking through subjects, and a close family member had passed away, and I was coming back from the funeral, and arrived in time to go to rugby practice. So I grabbed my kit and I went down there. And Major Baker of the aforementioned fame um, asked me where a bunch of travel documentation was, truck requests and typed, if you remember, disposition forms, with serial, numbers and stuff like that. And I
All
just
the
said,
paperwork to get you on a trip,
yeah,
the
yeah, and
club on
I
a trip,
became
right?
somewhat emotional, and I just said, I just didn't get it done, sir. You know what I mean? I was at a funeral. And he looked at me, and goes, "That's simply unacceptable. Those are lousy excuses. That's just you're not making the mark, Kelly. We'll find someone to replace you if you can't handle the job." And that's when I
Right.
realized that the profession of arms exceeded my little wants, needs, desires. It was
It
that little lesson.
pushed
So
you one level up.
That's right. So whenever any of my subordinates had close family members die, I took a forward position and told them, I don't care. No, I did not do that. It was,
Right? When it comes to any sort of empathy needed, you took a forward position on it.
I did. I took a forward position. No, I really didn't. But that was just one vignette of the uniqueness of the military training culture as it existed in the academy at the time. So
I think that is the genius of the system. I mean, the place is amazing today. What they do today, we were back in a very underfunded post Vietnam period, so
yeah.
it was just it was kind of pugil sticks and lectures was our big technology, but just pushing you that one extra step where you just if I was feeling just a little bit sorry for myself, it would just push you one more step. So my it just occurred to me as we're talking here. It's not my most vivid memory, but I just remembered the culture of you would do a long assignment. You would work for months on this assignment, some sort of project or paper or whatever, and they'd put a box on the desk up front, and they would just say the assignment is due today. Turn in your assignments, and we all walk up and hand it in. We feeling very much like, oh my gosh, this is a load off my back. I finally got this thing done. And the instructor in every class would just turn and circle the board and just start doing the next class, like no acknowledgement
Yeah,
Like, no celebration, no like, hey, how did you find it? Let's talk
yeah,
about how you're feeling. So it's like, no, on to the next
nothing.
mission, which was actually perfect setup for the Army, right?
Exactly, because that's exactly what you got to as a lieutenant, right?
That's exactly what you went to in the Army. Just like, okay, you're on the objective, great. Take a, off we go to the next one. So what? So you branched infantry.
I did.
What was the thinking there, and when did you know you were going to branch infantry, other than perhaps smashing your skull into other rugby acolytes? When did you know you wanted to go infantry?
Well, I was a bit torn. I had done my CTLT in Korea with a straight leg infantry unit, and was I thought all the bravado and all that was nifty at the time. Of course, I was I don't know 20 or 21, I forget. But I also had some little passion to go to aviation, and I went to the flight physical when we were firsties, or whatever the appropriate
Hmm.
pipeline was for that, prior to picking branches. And I went all the way through to the end, and the guy looked at me and goes, "Well, you flunked to get an astigmatism next." And that was the end of my aviation career. So at that point, I was like, well, what am I going to do?
Which is another one of those fantastic military moments. Just like your whole life is not going down this path.
Yeah.
Next,
And no flight suits, silk scarf. It's all
none
done,
of it.
right? You're done.
Top Gun, none of it.
Yeah. I was not to be Tom Cruise. So
Here's an inert hand grenade. Off you go. See if you can throw it.
exactly. The blue body with the little toe popper in it. Yeah. And so I just, then I want to go to Ranger School. So for some really dumb reason. And then, so I picked infantry, and then the rest is history, scrawled as a page in military history, I'm sure, somewhere.
What was the so let's transition to the Army now. Infantry, did you what was your just give us a brief overview of your path there as an infantryman?
Sure. So I was out at Fort Lewis for my first assignment, along with a lot of our other illustrious classmates, Cliff Maynard, Dino Dorman, Doug Andrews, Jeff Allen, many others. And it was in the now defunct Ninth Infantry Division for a while.
Mhm.
And then was in the 2nd Ranger Battalion out here, jumped into Panama. And then since that was sort of my formative military experience as a lieutenant, I thought, wow, this is great. So I decided I'd continue my military career, um, and did various tours in Alaska and Fort Bragg, and of course was TDY all over the place. So it's probably most of my focus of my career was in the Pacific Rim, or Asia Pacific as they kind of call it now.
So
Um,
you just kind of casually tossed in there, jumped into Panama, which is a perfect former Ranger moment, right? Just yeah, I jumped into Panama. So what job did you have when you jumped into Panama?
I was a rifle platoon leader.
Rifle platoon leader. Good for you.
That's right. So that was, sort of, I guess that was the pinnacle of, well, it might
That's
have
the
been the
tippity
pinnacle of
tip of
my
the
Army
spear, isn't it?
career, but certainly the pinnacle of my lieutenancy. And
Right.
it was, yeah, no, it was a great experience. We had a great group. It was a very professional organization, and it remains so today. And it's a very, very hard place to soldier for anybody. Certainly a young subaltern who, usually just consider himself very lucky to have been there, and to learn from people who were doing this as a hardcore profession, and not just kind of passing through, right?
So, what was the craziest experience you had? I mean, obviously, you had a tremendous amount of jobs, experiences, and to include combat. What was one of the crazier experiences you had in the Army that where you just looked around and said, "What on earth is happening here?"
Well, so that's interesting. So for my functional area, I was an FA 39, which was a civil affairs and psyops, and I was assigned after the appropriate training pipeline. I was in the 96 Civil Affairs at Fort Bragg, which at the time was the Army's only active duty civil affairs battalion. The officers were all, just general branch guys who were FA 39s. The enlisted folks were all senior Special Forces NCOs that, for various reasons, were no longer in operational groups.
Right.
So it was an interesting assortment of people coming out of the so-called conventional army, and then the unconventional senior Special Forces NCOs. So we were on a particular mission in Wake Island in the very middle of the Pacific Ocean, and we were taking. We were assigned to a brigade out of the 25th Infantry Division out of Hawaii, and we were caring for Chinese migrants who had been intercepted by the Coast Guard or whomever on a fishing boat
Mm-hmm.
and transported to Wake Island for onward processing back to China. We were at that point returning, and so we were. Wake Island is maintained as an auxiliary airfield for planes transiting the Pacific, and it's also active in monitoring missile test ranges and things like that in the Pacific. And they have a big group of Thai contract workers that sort of keep the place up and running. And so we were there, and I was, the civil affairs guy, and I would go to I forget, was it the brigade or the battalion headquarters, and there was a typical infantry colonel there laying down the law about, standards will be maintained, and there'll be absolutely no drinking. There'll be no interacting with the Thai contract workers whatsoever.
Leaning forward.
There'll be no consuming of fish caught in the lagoon, and there will absolutely no fraternization with the females in the female MP company that was supporting the brigade at the time.
Right.
And about 50 meters from the headquarters, I walked out to find my team, and they were all my SFNCOs having a luau beer party with the Thai contract workers and the female MPs in bikinis eating seafood that they had caught in the lagoon.
Literally everything you'd laid down violated in one fell swoop.
So I had a beer, and
What do you do?
what was
What
I
do you
gonna
do?
do, right?
What are you gonna do?
Yeah, it was a diverse community, and I had to pull things together, right?
Right.
Optimize their skills, realize what certain functions were good at and what they weren't good at.
Right.
So that was one of the, sort of through the looking glass moments of,
Right. That's brilliant. They never teach those moments, and they don't actually ever tell the stories of it. But man, have I been there? Where you just say, "Oh, just give me a beer," right? Oh,
Exactly. What else could you do? I
what
mean,
can you do, right? Right. That's fantastic. Um, Boeing. So you transition out of the Army. You're as a lieutenant colonel, I think, if I read my notes correctly.
yeah, that's correct. At the lofty perch of lieutenant colonel, which I found to be a strange rank, but we can get into that at some other point. But
Right, right. That'll be on our follow-up Strange Ranks podcast, which will be narrated by someone much more interesting than me. Um, and so you was Boeing your first gig out, or did you? How did you end up at Boeing? That's an interesting company, anyway.
Yeah, so I started out as a strategy analyst on the defense side.
Sure.
This was in whenever it was, I don't know, 2006. So just as an aside, if I might pump my own tires, I feel that I am the first person active duty to retire from our class. I retired on 1 June 2006, which is the first day you're eligible. Literally 20 years and 20 minutes, as I like to say.
Good for you.
And we should, although somebody may have also retired on that day, but I don't know who.
Well, that's a challenge for the podcast.
It is.
We'll troll through everybody and see if we can find somebody who beat the 20-minute mark.
And we should recognize Dan Hokinson, who's retiring soon as a 4-star, the chief of the National Guard.
He is. I'm going to head up there to his retirement ceremony. In fact,
he might be the last person on. And I don't know what his technical status
I don't know
is,
that
but he's
sure, but I think he is. Yeah, head of the entire reserve. So
yeah. So
very,
he's
very,
effectively
not from Quincy though. Not part of the Quincy Gold.
No, he's from Oregon, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
But great American, and congratulations to him. So
Absolutely.
sort of bookending the '86 saga. But anyway, so I did retire, and I had an illustrious 2 weeks of retirement. And then I started at Boeing after a 2-week
Okay.
retirement, which was very nice. And it was supporting the defense side as a strategy analyst, bringing all of my requisite military experience to bear on existing programs and future opportunities and blah, blah, blah.
What was your most interesting kind of job or project that you can talk about at Boeing? Coming out of the Army, you saw a certain set of circumstances. What was fascinating about that?
It was fascinating how the Boeing, very, very focused on the Navy and the Air Force customers, not a lot of customer intimacy, as I would call it, with the Army. And so they were knee deep in what was called at the time the Future Combat System, if you remember that. And so
Mhm.
it was all about network centric warfare and this. And I was on a call, and I remember, some of the up and coming Army leaders were, saying, beginning to throw the BS flag at the network centric warfare initiative, and I opined that some of the up and coming leading thinkers were beginning to question this whole concept. So you really are going to be challenged in keeping the program sold, and they all guffawed and laughed, and I was
Hmm.
never invited back. And of course, within 5 years, the entire program was canceled. So,
Right. There you go. Right. There you go.
yeah.
You can see it coming. Just they keep dressing it up, but there you go. Fascinating. So 60 years old. This is our 60th year, all of us, and for some of us it's a time of reflection. For many of us, not. But so looking back to your 40-year-old self, um, what advice would you give someone in their 40s, or the 40-year-old Paul Kelley just coming out of I guess just coming out of the Army at that point, or no? You were
Yeah,
40. You were
yeah. I was retiring at like
retiring. So
42 or
what
43.
advice would you give yourself if you go back and give yourself advice?
Well, eat more vegetables and exercise more and stuff like that, obviously. But to the point, uh, I I think at the time I regarded myself as old at 40, and now that I'm 60, I realize that no, you're still a young man. There's not much that you can't do if you put your mind to it.
Right.
And if you have, so don't limit yourself.
Right.
And then don't, and if you have kids, don't worry so much about how they're doing in late elementary school, middle school, or even high school in terms of grades and all that other crap. And getting into college, you waste
Yeah.
a lot of mental energy on it. There probably isn't anything you can do to affect the outcome, and most likely they'll go on to be nice, upstanding adults as long as you surrounded them with love and support as you went through that. So worry a lot less about that kind of crap.
Sage advice to a younger Paul Kelley and to younger all of us. I guess the specter of our 80-year-old selves looking over and saying, "Your knees still work. Get up and walk." So,
Exactly. You could have been playing more pickleball, but you weren't.
why aren't you playing pickleball? You could be a champion.
I could
You
have.
know.
I'd be on the circuit. Yeah.
Oh man, Paul Kelley, what an absolute honor to talk to you, and fantastic to see you. And we're of course good friends from way back in the day. You have been a standout guest on the Courage Never Quits podcast. Thanks so much for coming on.
It's much appreciated, Paul, and we should get together soon.
Absolutely. Talk soon.
Okay, bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of '86 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. We'll see you in the next episode.